This week on Influence, get ready for the best and worst podcasting advice you'll ever get. Greetings, Internet travelers. Welcome back to Influence with me, Matt Silverman. Thanks for hanging out with me for another week on the show, talking about all things internet culture, all the things and people we love to follow online that make the internet worth interneting, creativity, business. And I've got a great one for you today. I'm really excited about it, but fair warning, I think there's going to be a lot of shop talk, a lot of business of the internet shop talk, because my guest today has... I'm going to say has had many careers on this old internet of ours, and I'm excited to hear about all of them. I want to hear about the trajectory that has brought him to his current project. He is a tech entrepreneur from the 1990s. Now, I don't usually bring a lot of tech bros onto the podcast, but tech bros from the 90s, that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm excited to go back in time a little bit. He's also an award-winning travel photographer and blogger. He's been literally everywhere. So we're going to hear about his travels as well. He was, maybe still is, a digital nomad for more than a decade. We're going to find out about that as well. And since 2020, he has published, we were just chatting right before the episode, I thought it was 1,400. It's actually 1,600 episodes of his daily podcast. That means every single day. As a podcaster, it's blowing my mind. 1,600 episodes of his daily educational podcast, which is called Everything Everywhere. And it's about everything, which is, we're going to talk about that too, because I wouldn't do it, but he does it. I'm very excited to get in the weeds of the online content business, both then and now. I think my guest is going to have a lot of lessons for us in 2025. And like I said, a lot of shop talk. So please observe the fasten seatbelt sign and buckle up for Gary Arndt. Welcome to Influence. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
My first question for you, Gary Arndt, is, aren't you glad to be on this podcast?
I'm very glad. Especially with your fine collection of stringed instruments in the back.
Oh, yes, yes. Most of them are cheap nonsense, and one of them is a Martin. Sorry, audio listeners, I have guitars hanging on the wall. Do you play instruments? Are you a connoisseur of? No, okay.
Yeah. There is a disconnect between my brain and my fingers.
Okay.
That I tried it, and I failed miserably playing trumpet in grade school. Great respect for people who can do it, though. And even, one of my favorite guitar players, he's not even a guitar player, he's more than that, was Roy Clark.
Okay.
He was just always known as the master of any stringed instrument. The joke was he could play a tennis racket. But great banjo player, guitar player, violin player, anything with a string.
Mm-hmm. And those are all different instruments. They have wildly different fretboards and fret mechanics. So like someone who can do all that is amazing. I only play guitar. Video viewers will notice that there is a banjo here, but it's a trick. It is a guitar with a banjo body and 6 strings. It is not a banjo. I have no idea how to play the banjo. It sounds great. It's very heavy. It never stays in tune, and it looks cool on the wall. So there you go. I would love to introduce you to listeners and viewers. When you explain what you do for a living these days, how do you talk about it with folks?
I say I have a daily educational podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That's the elevator pitch.
And then if they are interested in learning more,
they will usually say, "Is it on Spotify?" And I say, "Yes." I say, "Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find it." Yep. That's the one sentence version. If I say it more than that, I'll say, "Well, it's one of the world's most popular educational podcasters." If I'm trying to impress someone, but basically that's what it is. The show. So the name Everything Everywhere, I had it well before the movie came out.
Yes.
That was the name of my travel blog. So 2007, I sold my home to travel around the world. almost 18 years now since I started doing that. And the name I picked, I was thinking of a name for my website, and it just hit me. I was in the car one day, Everything Everywhere, because that was the goal of what I was trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I was blogging under.
Mm-hmm.
And we can get into the story later about how I ended up pivoting, but the name also worked really well for the podcast. So I just stuck with it.
Yep. Take us back before that, before travel blogging, before photography. What were you doing professionally? What was your education? What were you doing professionally in the mid to late 90s?
So I went to school. I got a triple major in math, economics, political science. But reality, I was on one of the top ranked debate programs in the United States. So I was traveling every weekend all around the country. And after that, I coached high school debate for several years, was one of the top high school coaches in the country. And one of my friends called me one day, one of my former roommates, and said, "You should check this thing out. It's called the World Wide Web." And this was in 93.
Okay.
It was still very early.
Yes.
And I went up to the Twin Cities to see him, and he had a 9600 baud modem. And I remember the very first web page I ever saw was a page he pulled up for the Library of Congress.
Mm.
And it was about, I think, a visiting museum display from the Vatican Museum or something. But the point is, there were pictures and text.
Mm-hmm.
And it came up kind of slow, but this was huge. This was before Windows 95 came out, before a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
And so him and his brother, who are both still very active, my friend was JJ Allaire. He ended up building a product called Cold Fusion, which is today owned by Adobe.
Right. Okay.
And it was basically an early version of a scripting language to let you hook up databases to the internet.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was like, I thought it was like query stuff or database stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he built this because at the time it was hard to do. You had to use like a Perl script, and the only web browser or the web servers were for Unix, not even Linux. Right. This is pre-Linux, pre-MySQL, pre-PHP.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there were, things people were quoting like $20,000 for a website that had 5 HTML pages.
Static pages.
Yes.
That don't no blog, no updating content, just a website with 5 pages on it.
And I mean, I even remember his brother Jeremy, who was helping him. He's now the CEO of Circle, which is a stablecoin company. We were arguing one day about whether we should use the table tag for the new Netscape browser, because it wasn't supported in Mosaic. So anyways, this is really early on. So they're making this product, and it grows pretty big. Ends up being bought by Macromedia, which is later bought by Adobe.
Oh, right. I was wondering about the path to Adobe. Macromedia had the Flash player, which ended up being Adobe Flash. Interesting.
So, but people were coming to him saying, "Well, I would like to have my company's website built with your product," but they didn't want to get into that business. So he comes to me and he says, "Do you want to do this?" So I'm like, "Sure." So I start using his tool, and I had to learn all this stuff from scratch, including SQL and everything else. But that's what you do in your early 20s.
Yeah.
You're too dumb to know that you don't know. And we start building this, and then more companies came forward, and I had a friend, and I hired him, and he had a friend. And fast forward 4 years later, I'm 28. I have 50 people working for me. We have a consulting firm. We have very big clients. And I got an offer to sell the company. And this was before the dot-com bubble burst. And I kind of felt that everything was super inflated in price.
Right. So
I took their offer.
Yeah.
And then for 1 year, I was on their payroll. They paid me a lot of money to do literally nothing. I was like this island on the org chart where no one was above me or below me. They gave me a cubicle. I would come in at like 10 in the morning, said hi to everyone so everyone could see me. I would surf the web for 2 hours, and then I'd go for lunch and never come back. And they were paying me 6 figures to do this as just part of the deal. Little did I know the reason they bought the company was so they had something to do with the internet so their company could be sold. And this was a big global
Oh, yes,
company.
that's very fascinating. Meaning they had to like prove to shareholders that they were on the cutting edge of something.
Right.
Yeah.
And they did it through buying my company. And one of the things they did, I conned them into sending me around the world to their offices to talk about web application development.
Okay.
And so I had never really been out of the country before, other than a very brief trip to Canada. And so I went to Tokyo, Taipei, Singapore, Frankfurt, Brussels, London, and Paris in a 3-week period, circumnavigated the globe. First time I'd ever traveled anywhere. And that really stuck with me. And that was kind of that period in the 90s. I was kind of had a front row seat to a lot of the very, very early internet stuff.
Yeah. And then, so you basically, you became almost like a free agent after that, meaning like you had enough money to live. And then weren't you working on like gaming forums or something? Tell me about that.
So there was a guy, was living in the Twin Cities, who really brilliant network engineer and played video games. And he had a very popular video game website. There was like a news website, but he tried to parlay this into becoming an ISP, and it didn't work. And he had like 10 grand in debt that he couldn't pay.
I don't know how someone does that, but okay. Yeah. Turning a website,
but I was like,
from website to ISP.
I said, here's the deal. I'll pay off your debt. You give me the website. And so I did that, and we started stomp.com, and we ended up cutting a deal with CNET. And again, this is before the .com bubble burst, but
so what year roughly?
98. So I sold the company in 98. So I started this in 99.
Okay.
And then we ended up getting so we had the official Counter-Strike site at the time, which was brand new, the biggest EverQuest website, and we were selling ads through, and they were doing a lot of traffic,
right?
Because there was nothing else, and we were kind of arbitraging our deal with CNET to sell ads for these sites. So Alakazam,
right? And
I think we were doing like 50 million page views a month, and a lot of this, quite frankly, was like forum traffic, so it's not super high quality, but
okay.
We were getting like a $2 CPM from them, and then giving them a $1 CPM, and it worked out really well until one day it didn't. And that was when the .com bubble burst, and CNET called us and were like, yeah, we're exercising our clause to opt out of the contract. Wow. And we was like, and then like overnight, everything changed.
The bottom fell out of internet advertising. To summarize, is that accurate? Yeah.
Now, in hindsight, had I stuck with it and kept the site going somehow, like 10 years later, it probably would have been very worthwhile.
Sure.
But it would have been a very difficult 10 years.
Yeah. When you say official Counter-Strike site, meaning you had partnered with Valve to make the official destination, the official forum for the game?
So Counter-Strike was a mod for Half-Life.
Oh gosh, that's right.
Cliffy and Gooseman were the two. I don't even know their real names. Were the guys, and we had their forum, and so Counter-Strike became huge. So we were doing it with them. It wasn't.
So Valve must have bought it back from them at some point. Is that what happened?
Later on, when I lost interest.
Yeah,
yes.
Interesting.
So this was around. This was 2000 when this happened. Cool. And after this, and I also had opened a LAN gaming center. And very briefly, just at the dawn of like cyber sports, we were involved with this, and it was a great facility. But the problem was what I didn't anticipate is that this was all going to kind of get taken over by consoles like the Xbox,
right?
Networked consoles, which didn't exist at the time. It was still all desktop. So we bought all these very expensive Alienware machines and 21-inch CRT monitors that broke your back when you tried to carry it. And it was a beautiful facility. And you could come in, because people used to do LAN parties.
Right.
Everyone would bring their computer to someone's house, hook them up, play them locally. You could play at high speeds over Ethernet.
Which is such a pain in the ass. So imagine if you could just hop into a cafe and just plug in and play.
And we did. Friday nights, Saturday nights, the place was packed. During the week, we'd have people come in and they would play EverQuest. World of Warcraft hadn't launched yet, but they would do raids, with their guild from wherever, because we had a T1 connection, which was huge at the time. But eventually that didn't become really sustainable either.
Yeah.
And I was even thinking of opening up a facility at the Mall of America, and thankfully I never pulled the trigger on that.
Right. In a funny way, post-pandemic and in a world today where everything is so online, the idea of gathering in person to play video games sounds delightful, and I would love to do that more often.
It's still fun.
Yeah.
Even when I had the consulting firm, after work, a lot of us would play Quake.
Yeah.
We would just stay at work and play on our work machines, and I played with them, and it was fun.
Great.
We even had like how places used to have a bowling league.
Sure.
We played Tribes, which I still think is a great game.
Right.
But it was a really great team first-person shooter, and we had a really competitive Tribes team. And the very first, I went to some of the events for the first, like, the cyber athlete things, the CPL. And yeah, I know it's kind of become a thing now, but it's one of those things I was way too early.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. All right. So that sort of not dries up, but the industry moves away from that, and then you start traveling. Is this right?
Well, in between, I decided to go back to school. I attended the University of Minnesota for a couple of years, and I always said that if I could go back to college, I would do one of two things. I would either blow off all my classes and get D's and C's and focus on winning a national championship in debate. Because I came close. I was in the quarterfinals my junior year, made the Sweet 16 my senior year. Came close, but never quite enough. And I said, or I would just not have done debate at all, and I would have gotten a degree in physics. And I was like, I could still get the degree in physics. So I went back, and I ended up actually focusing on geology and geophysics.
Okay.
Because it was a really interdisciplinary subject. It did real well. And I was older when I went back. I was in my 30s. And I got to know a lot of the PhD students because they were more my age, and I realized their lives were miserable. It was not something that was appealing. Like, okay, well, what are you going to do when you get your PhD? Well, I'll go work for some tiny college or something. It wasn't great. And to be completely honest, I'm better at learning than I am at doing research.
Okay. All right.
I was a horrible field geologist, and and then I came up with the idea of selling my home and traveling around the world.
Okay. So bitten by the bug from that previous travel experience.
Right. And I did a few others. When I was at the geology department, we did a field trip. I went with them to Argentina to collect soil samples. I did a trip on my own up to Iceland for the heck of it. And this was something I felt I really wanted to do. At that time, I had no kids, wasn't married. I had no obligations whatsoever. And in 2007, I was 37. I sold my house and set out to travel around the world.
Amazing. Completely untethered. It's 2007. So you're online, obviously, as you're traveling, and photography comes into the picture. No pun intended.
Yeah. I should say I started traveling. So as the day we are recording this today, January 9th, this is 18 years ago to the day where the iPhone was announced.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs did the initial but it didn't go on sale right away.
Right.
It went on sale in June. So I started traveling in the period where it was announced, but it wasn't available. So there were no smartphones when I started traveling. I had a crappy flip Samsung phone that I ended up throwing in the garbage in New Zealand because there were no SIM cards available.
Yeah, right.
You couldn't do roaming plans. It was useless outside of the US.
Right.
So I tossed it, and I had to go to internet cafes a lot because Wi-Fi was not ubiquitous. Right. I remember even buying this cheap little key fob thing that you'd press, and it would tell you if there was a Wi-Fi signal. And all of that, I remember. So after it came out, I started my trip through the Pacific, island hopping, and I spent basically 9 months crossing the Pacific Ocean. Wow. Visiting Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Micronesia, all these places. I get to Japan in November, and I go to the Apple store in the Ginza district and I'm like, I bought an iPod Touch, which was basically, they don't make them anymore, but it's an iPhone without the phone.
Yeah.
So it's just a Wi-Fi device. And this like blew my mind. I was like, this is fantastic. No camera or anything. As far as the photography, when I started, I bought a camera that was really expensive and I thought it would take good pictures. And I learned immediately that is not how it works, that there are all the buttons and dials and knobs do things. So I set about learning how to do that. And one of the things I did is I was in Hong Kong in December around Christmas. And I kind of had this come to Jesus moment. I was like, I'm posting all this stuff to my website. It's not really taken off. I don't, either I need to do something or abandon this, but I didn't know what do something was. No, but there weren't content creators at the time, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I mean, people were making content, but it wasn't like something you did for a living.
Right.
It wasn't. And the travel industry especially is extremely conservative, and they were not, to them, anything in the internet wasn't real. Even though
to most industries, that was the novelty of it. Yes.
Expedia and online booking was just eating the lunch of travel agents.
Right.
Which is what was paying for all of the travel sections in major newspapers.
Right. Interesting.
So I sat down, I bought some magazines. I did a quick analysis. I created an Excel spreadsheet and like, what content are they putting in these magazines? One of the things I realized was editorially, there's about 30 different countries that they mention per issue. And most people are not visiting 30 countries in a month, let alone in their life. There's a lot of photography. And I realized that this was these travel magazines were basically pornography. It was travel porn.
Yeah.
This was for people to fantasize about places that they might want to visit one day. So I set about, it's like, okay, I'm gonna get better at photos. I'm gonna integrate more photos into my website, and I started posting a photo every day to my website. This is pre-Instagram, even pre-Twitter,
right?
I think Facebook. You still had to have like a college email address to get access to it.
Wow, yeah.
So I just started doing this, and the website was my social media. People came to the website. People had RSS readers, which still are awesome, and I don't know why more people don't use it.
I agree.
And they would leave comments on the website. And I posted a photo every day on my website for 8 years. And that basically put me into the discipline of taking photos, but also making my work public. Because forcing your work to be public makes you do better. And then over time, the website just became more popular. It was one of the first. I got better at photography to the point where I was basically won every major award. In the last decade for travel photography. I was named Travel Photographer of the Year 3 times for North America. And then I was basically living on the road. I ended up visiting over 200 different countries and territories around the world.
Wow. Every
U.S. state I've been to
I mean, like, there's only like 250, 300 countries in the world. Like,
well, this is where you have to get into like the technical definition of what is a country.
Right.
So of the countries in the UN, I've been to 130, but that doesn't cover places like Antarctica or French Polynesia. French Polynesia is a part of France, just as much as Hawaii is a part of America.
I see.
But if you say, I'm going to France, that doesn't mean you're visiting islands in the Pacific. It means you're going to that hexagonal place in Europe where they wear berets and eat baguettes.
Okay.
So there's a thing called the Traveler Century Club that divides the world into like 326 different
places to be.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So
interesting.
Puerto Rico is a different thing.
That makes sense.
If you go to Puerto Rico, have you visited the United States?
Right.
In one way, yes, but in another way, not really.
Right.
So it's its own thing. So on that list, I've been to 200.
If you've been to Arkansas, have you been to the United States? That's another interesting question. You know what I mean? Any state, name any state, is so different from another place. Anyway.
Well, I mean, and then you get into like, each state in terms of population and economics are the equivalent of a European country. For the most part.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I did a lot of travel, and it's not like I set foot in a country that has an international airport. Like, I visited every state in Germany. I've been to every state in Australia. I've been to every state in South Africa. I've been like I said, all these little island places all over. I traveled a lot.
The blog audience, I'm curious, the blog audience that's consuming and truly subscribed through RSS and also directly going to your .com, I'm sure it's partially travel porn, but also, or like photo porn, but like there must be subscribed to like, where's he off to next? And what is the next adventure going to be, right? Is that part of the narrative?
When I started, I was writing my thoughts about places. My blog was a true blog, web blog. But eventually that changed with the rise of social media. And it kind of killed it because now people they weren't using RSS because Google killed Google Reader, which really put a knife in that. So they could launch Google Plus, and that worked out great. I had 2 million followers on Google Plus. A lot of good.
Google Plus was fun. Yeah, we did okay there.
There's a lot of people that this is like the ancient history of the internet that I'm going through.
Yeah, and I'm catching up with you now in my time. Working on the internet.
Twitter comes out, and I'm all in on Twitter, right? And I'm into a lot of this stuff. I get a 6-figure audience on Twitter. I have little under 180,000 people that follow me on Instagram. I got a 6-figure audience on Facebook. I was all in on social media.
Yeah.
But eventually they kind of pulled the rug out. Facebook was like, oh, you got to have a fan page, grow your fan page. And then the organic reach dropped. And then you got to pay us money to run an ad to reach the people who followed you.
I mean, this is literally what obliterated all of the media companies that I worked for, but yes.
And then, so by 2018, 2019, I also realized that nobody was going to these travel blogs anymore. It was all SEO, almost 100% SEO.
Right.
So instead of me providing my thoughts about, the issue of diabetes, heart disease, obesity is a huge problem in Polynesia. I'd write my thoughts on this and some of the causes, and you couldn't write that anymore. Everybody was writing the same article. 15 things to do in Las Vegas. 15. And they would keyword research the most popular places and they would all write the same shit. And it was like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't want to do this.
Yeah.
And the photography part of it, even though I have a pretty big following on Instagram, it became the same stuff. I could tell you the response I would get before I posted it. If I post a picture of a mountain and a sunset or a waterfall, it would do really well. If I posted a picture of a person, any person, it didn't do well at all. And I heard people say, well, images with people do really well. It's like, no, images with the person who owns the account do real well.
Yes.
Because they know who that is.
Yes.
If it's a random travel photo of someone that you photographed on your travels, that does not do well. Because that's also, just a stranger.
What happens in the world where like you are taking at this time, you're taking unique photographs of moments that you're capturing in your personal travels, but like I can Google image any photo you take, I can find a matching photo or AI generate the fucking photo.
Right. But here's the big thing. Let's say 20,000 people like my photo on Instagram.
Right.
So what? What does that get me? Nothing. It's ephemeral. Can you tell me the last 10 things you liked on social media?
Oh, absolutely not.
No one can. It's completely ephemeral. It is meaningless. Yeah. And so it also, around the same time, the pursuit of all these likes were like, and the social media was turning me off. The blogging was turning me off. And so 2018, I came up with the what is the part of the internet that is closest to what it used to be? And there's only one thing left where people still use RSS. It's podcasting.
Yes.
And so I came up with this idea. I hired someone to create artwork. I licensed music for the show. And my idea was I was going to do these 2 to 3 hour episodes. I produce them once every 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I realized I kind of did the numbers. It's like, this is a bad business model.
Yeah.
This is not going to work. And I just put it aside, even though I had all the artwork and everything done. And then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
The travel industry was uniquely, like, I can tell you the timeline of this because it's burned into my mind. February 28th, 2020, I come back from my last international trip. after spending 13 years on the road.
Wow.
I come home from Portugal. I get COVID. Next day, March 1st. So I'm OG COVID too.
You were patient zero, basically. Yeah.
And this was early enough, like March 1st, where COVID's in the news, but it's not like there's tests. And they're like, oh, we got to save stuff for first responders and everything. And this is when they're like, oh, we need 1 million ventilators because, half the population is going to die. So I get sick and it sucked. I get better in a week. But then the travel world just starts disappearing.
Yeah.
And if you think restaurants and bars were hurt, like they could at least do takeout, right? A lot of places did that. This went to nothing. The brands I worked with, the companies I work with, completely shut down and had zero revenue.
Were you making a living doing the blog?
I was
making brand partnerships and such.
A lot of my travel was sponsored. Yeah. I had no expenses because I had at that point I did have an apartment, but I was still on the road half the year. I was making a living. I wouldn't say it was doing stellar, but it was paying the bills.
Yeah. Okay.
But I had contracts. I worked with tourism boards, things like that, and just boom, 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 boom. Everything gone. Everything got canceled. Within a 2-week span, my income dropped 95%.
Yeah.
And so everyone's sitting at home, and I do some Zoom calls with people who I know who are higher up in the travel industry in certain companies because they got nothing to do. And I start talking to them, and I'm like, "Well, do you think this is going to be done by mid-April, mid-May?" Yeah. And they're like, "No, this is good. This is going to take years to play out." And all of the thoughts and complaints I had about where the state of the business was pre-pandemic, I'm like, maybe this is the opportunity now to just completely shift gears.
Right.
And I had a friend who had a daily podcast, and it did really well.
Okay.
And I remember meeting him a year previously at an event. We're at the speaker's reception. And he told me, it's like, this is the best thing I've ever done. So I thought about that. It's like, what if I took the other idea I had for a podcast, and instead of doing these big shows, what if I took the opposite approach where I take a shotgun approach to things?
Right.
And I did the math. I'm like, this works out a lot better. Because if you look at what makes a successful podcast, obviously you need to have a good show. You need to have good content. That's a given.
Sure.
But also it's time and episodes. Because every piece of content you create is another opportunity for someone to discover you. Yeah. Right? Regardless of how long it is, especially in podcasting. Yeah. So I was like, okay. And I felt I was also in a unique position to do this because I had at that point degrees in 5 subjects, ranging from, the humanities to the hard sciences to math. Yeah. I had traveled the world and seen all these amazing historic sites. I was very well read in history. And I was like, I think I have a skill set. I could use all the things I learned, but it wasn't a travel podcast. Yeah. And the problem I also learned with travel is I had friends who had fashion websites, food websites, celebrity gossip websites. And they all had way more traffic than even the best travel blog I knew of. Yeah, yeah. It's because people care about this stuff every day. Every day you eat. Every day people are always interested in food and there's something new happening. Yeah. Sports. Yes. There's always a political thing going on. Nothing new happens in travel. The Colosseum, it's been there 2,000 years. Probably be there another 2,000 more.
Unless you create something that's like, oh, this spot used to be bad, but now it's good. And here's 15 reasons why you should go there. But
there's a theme park that opens. Yeah, yeah. Stuff like that. But, in terms of a lot of travel, why people would go to Europe or something, that's not changing. No. People are interested in travel before they're about to go on a trip. Yes. The end. Then they're not interested. It's not something you follow. So it's like, well, what if I could create something that people could follow that
it's an SEO business and not a loyalty business, which is what you were interested in making. Yeah.
So I hatched the idea for this new podcast. I made the podcast I want to listen to. I have eclectic interests on all sorts of different things. I'm a very curious person. I had the perfect name for the show already. It's the website I had that had
Same as
really
you
good
had,
domain
yeah.
authority.
Okay.
And I launched the show on July 1st, 2020.
Okay. So I want to play some clips of the show so listeners have a sense of what you do. And then I do want to dig in a little bit more about the strategy because I find a lot of it very interesting. So here's some clips of Everything Everywhere from Gary, and you'll see it's a wide range of topics.
Tokyo, Japan is currently the largest city in the world with a metropolitan population of over 37 million people. However, that wasn't always the case. In fact, unlike many great cities of the world, Tokyo's roots do not go back to ancient times. Its importance as a city is relatively recent, historically speaking. It was almost completely destroyed several times, yet has come back to become a major center of technology, culture, and finance. Learn more about Tokyo and how it became the most populous city in the world on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. In a previous episode, I discussed what would be required to terraform Mars. This episode is not about that. Terraforming an entire planet would take hundreds, if not thousands of years and an unspeakable amount of money. In this episode, I want to focus on the near term, or a time period much less than centuries. Something that could possibly happen within our lifetimes. So first, let's cover the relatively simple case of what would be required for the very first humans to just visit Mars. I say relatively simple because if and when humans finally set foot on Mars, it will be an incredibly difficult undertaking. However, compared to setting up a colony, it'll be relatively straightforward. First, let's compare what going to Mars would entail compared to what was required to go to the moon. The Apollo missions were much simpler compared to what would be required to get to Mars. The moon is relatively close, with an average distance of 238,855 miles, or 384,400 kilometers. Given its astronomically close distance, the craft used by the Apollo astronauts only had to provide enough life support for under 2 weeks. The longest Apollo mission was Apollo 17, which lasted just 12 days. I don't want to take away from the incredible feat which was the Apollo program, but compared to going to Mars, it was a relative cakewalk. A mission to Mars will take between 6 to 9 months. The closest distance between the Earth and Mars is 34.8 million miles, or 56 million kilometers. The first thing that you should know about the peanut is that it's not a nut. Even though peanuts are sold and served alongside other nuts, peanuts are not nuts because they do not grow on trees. Peanuts are legumes. They are more closely related to beans and peas than they are to nuts. So to this extent, you can sort of think of a peanut like a tomato. Tomatoes are fruit served as vegetables, and peanuts are legumes which are served as nuts. The scientific term for the peanut plant is Arachis hypogea, and there are 4 main varieties of peanuts: runner peanuts, Virginia peanuts, Spanish peanuts, and Valencia peanuts. The peanut has a very uncommon way of growing its fruit, known as geocarpy. They have a shoot that comes off the plant, known as a peg, that goes underground, which develops the pods. The average plant will produce 25 to 50 pods, with each one containing 1 to 4 seeds.
So what's fascinating to me, and now I'm a new fan of the show, a new listener, is that it's eclectic, it's great, it's in depth, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But it goes against the advice that I typically give to people who want to start
My
a
show
project.
Violates every rule that people
Exactly.
have about podcasting.
Yes, because when I want to know about horror movies, I go to the horror movie YouTube channel, and when I want to know about cooking recipes, I go to this Instagram person who always cooks my favorite stuff. But your pitch is like, what's your podcast about? Anything, you name it. That's ridiculous.
So all the things you mentioned are for getting advice, expertise.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm not providing that.
Right.
I am providing a cursory overview of a subject. Mm-hmm. So people at least have a basic understanding and knowledge of it. Mm. That's one thing. So I'm not telling you how to cook, but I'll give you the history of cooking, which I've literally done, talking about fire and the human use of fire and things like that. Yeah. That and people always say, you got to niche down if you want to start a podcast. Keep niching until it hurts. The biggest podcasts out there don't niche down. They don't. They have a very broad. If you look at my Spotify demographics,
you're not
like
wrong.
it is flat across every age group.
Yeah.
I have 9-year-olds that say I'm their favorite teacher. I have people in nursing homes that listen. I got truck drivers. I have people at MIT. And even if you happen to know a lot about one episode, you're probably not going to know about the next episode. So, and the reason I think why it's successful, to go back to this, everything we are fed online is through an algorithm.
Yes.
Oh, you like this? Then you'll like this thing that is similar.
Correct.
And maybe that's true, but maybe there's a complete other thing out in left field that, you would be interested in, but how are you ever going to know it? Because the algorithm is only feeding you things that are like connected to it.
But
and
it's so hard to break out of that bubble. And it's so hard to look at your show and be like, I don't give a shit about Tokyo. Why would I listen to this? Oh, well, I guess the hook, when you talk to your audience, because I know you have a community of listeners these days, how do they communicate? Like, I got hooked on, I was interested in X, and then I stuck around for all these other episodes that I never would have cared about until I listened.
I don't think most people start that way. I think if they find the show, they're going to see a list of recent episodes and they're all freaking different.
Yeah.
And it's that variety that is what hooks people.
Yeah.
So my theory of learning and education is that when you strip everything down to the studs, there are two things you need to learn, and only two things. You need to be literate, of which our society does a reasonably good job. And you need to be curious, of which our society does a horrible job.
Yeah. And I think while your podcast is very successful, it is not, I don't think normal people listen to it. Does that make sense? Like, your audience is curious, engaged, smart people, not
normal
average Joe, right?
Is watching the Kardashians, then you are correct. I do not believe
I'm sort of alluding to that. Yeah.
There's not, if you had a Venn diagram of people that are interested in my show and the Kardashians, I believe that is a very small overlap.
No disrespect to Kim. I know she's a listener. We want to have you on. Let me know.
But it's not, it's not well-educated people necessarily. Like I said, I have a lot of truck drivers that listen.
Yeah.
And to be honest, if you look at, whenever we talk about education, we'll talk about like student test scores or things like that. None of that matters.
Yeah.
Our goal is to not have good student test scores. Our goal, what it should be, is to have intelligent adults. That is the end product of education. Yet if you look at general knowledge assessment tests given to adult Americans, it is as if they never went to school.
Right.
They have forgotten everything.
Yeah.
Literally everything. And so the question is, well, what the hell was the point? We invest all this money and all this time and we fret about all this stuff, but at the end, nobody knows anything. And this is college professors as well.
Right.
A lot of people beyond their area of expertise know almost nothing.
Yeah. Right.
And so what I'm trying to do with the show is to give people, a broad knowledge set. So they'll at least, the episodes aren't very long. They're about 12 minutes of actual
Which
content.
is also the key, because if you were like, hey, check out my podcast about random shit and every episode's an hour 30, that's too high an ask. But I'll listen to, the history of cooking fire for 15 minutes for sure.
One of the things I found, and there's a lot of things I discovered that I didn't realize when I started the show, but in hindsight was brilliant. I have a bunch of podcasts that I listen to, and I realize I always listen to the short ones first because I can get them out of the way.
Yeah.
So one of the podcasts I listen to is Pod News. It's a daily summary of the news in the podcasting world. It's like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I get that out of the way. That is out of my queue. But if there's an interview show that has a 3-hour interview, that is a commitment. So that's something I'm going to probably do last. And a lot of people, they tell me, well, yeah, I can listen to your show on the way to work. I get in the car, listen. By the time I get to work, it's done. Or one of my friends from college says, I listened with my daughter before I drop her off to school. Or people will listen over breakfast with their kids, and then they can talk about it, the episode, because it's short enough. And I also felt when I started the show that there's an amount you can ask of your audience. And I felt that was about 1 hour a week.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that do more, but basically, but you can split that up. You can do 1 hour, a weekly 1 hour episode every week, or you could split it up like I do. And I realized that if you split it up, it actually kind of makes more financial sense from a business standpoint.
More opportunities to put ads and breaks and things.
It's also, I'm putting more stuff out there. So I have 1,600 points where people can find me. Yep. So if they're looking for an Eiffel Tower on Apple Podcasts, I'm going to come up.
Right.
If they're looking for Genghis Khan, I'll come up, because I'm throwing a very wide net. Mm-hmm. Those podcasts where it's just a cooking podcast, they're going to have a very narrow subset of things that they're going to come up for.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so conflicted, because I think this is brilliant and really good advice, and also I think you have hit on something unique, and your unique experience, as you have experience in the internet business. You know what will work and what won't work. You've been through the ups and downs of the internet. You've been to almost every country in the world, and you have this encyclopedic knowledge and education. Those factors came together to make the widest net possible. I don't know that most people are equipped to do something like this.
I've often said, I don't think I'm the only person who could do this podcast, but of the people who could do it, no one else would.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of work.
Well, this is my other question, and we have to take a break in a bit, but you're publishing an episode every day.
I do reruns about twice a week at this point.
Okay.
But statistically, I know most people haven't listened to those. I mean, once you got 1,600 episodes, and it's not like, all the episodes are super evergreen.
Yeah.
There's a few episodes I've actually done updates to where I did the episode on President John Tyler's grandsons. John Tyler was born in the year 1797. He still has a grandson alive today. Not a great-grandson, not a great-great-grandson, a grandson. Mm-hmm. And now you start immediately trying to do the math.
Yeah.
And it was basically, he had a kid really late who had a kid really late, and that kid is almost 100.
Right. But so I guess, as someone who's been making stuff on the internet for a little while now, how are you alive making a podcast every single day? Like, this is because every single show, as we've heard, but I encourage you to subscribe and listen to more of Gary's work, is like a mini audiobook. It is very meticulously researched and very precisely produced. So maybe before we go to break, what does the workflow look like for you? And is there a team? Like, what you have producers working on this?
No.
Okay. You thank producers at the end of your show.
They are people who give money on Patreon. There's a producer level.
So that's is all
they're doing.
Got it. Okay.
No one else has ever helped me in the production, research, writing, and recording of any episode of my show ever.
Okay.
This has been a one-man operation completely.
So you wake up, and what does your day look like then?
I might play video games for a while. I've been playing Baldur's Gate 3.
Hey, I'm in Act 3, and it's the best game I've ever played in my life. I think it's the best game ever made.
I started Act 3, and then I went back. So I started a bard, and quite frankly, bards I thought were kind of lame, and all my damage was being done by my fighter. So I went back and I rolled a barbarian as a main, so I could use the fighter. They both had two-handed weapons, and they just destroy shit. But no, so everyone says, "Oh, it's a lot of work," but like, it's no different than going to a job every day.
Sure.
If you have work 8 hours a day, I mean, no one says, "Oh, you work in an office for insurance. How do you do that?"
Yeah. But there's a pressure. I find there's a pressure. I call it the treadmill of, like, once you step on and you have a large audience, it's like, if that is not there the next day, you miss it. That's a liability for your livelihood. Whereas if you're an office drone, it's like, I didn't file the report, I'll get it tomorrow.
That is true. But basically, I can write an episode now. So I write a script for every show. I'm basically writing a 2,000-word term paper every day.
No thanks.
But it's not quite a term paper. I'm not like putting footnotes and stuff in it. I'm not I'm just telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I will pick a topic that I feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are topics that I've been, the ultraviolet catastrophe is one that I've been thinking of doing for like 2 years.
Okay.
Ultraviolet catastrophe is
I'm
how
not familiar
quantum
with
physics. It's how quantum physics came about. It was
Okay.
a problem in the late 19th, early 20th century where the predicted model of how light would behave works in a certain way for like a black body, which radiates heat.
Mm.
But theoretically, it didn't match reality after a certain point. And so this was a huge problem. They're trying to fix it. And the guy who found the solution, Max Planck, realized that, okay, this works if we treat light like individual quanta.
Yeah.
But of
Particles.
course, that's not really how it is. But just treat it that way and the math works. And it turned out that is how it works. That is reality.
Mm-hmm.
But that is, I keep thinking of, doing an episode on that. I just haven't pulled the trigger, but it's something that I feel comfortable with. I'll do geography episodes every so often that I'm very comfortable with.
Right.
Math episodes. I just did today's episode was on fractals, certain science episodes, the history stuff.
But this is why you are a unique creature in the world, because when you niche down, as you said earlier, well, I know everything about video games, so I'm going to make it a video game podcast is so easy. But making a podcast about geography would be laborious for someone like me. And in your situation, you have been everywhere and you've seen way more than most people have, and so you can pull it out much with less effort, perhaps.
Yeah, and some episodes do require a great deal of more time.
Yeah.
And I'm coming up with new ideas. What I especially love are ideas that it's not just one episode, but it's like, oh, I can do 30 episodes about this.
Yeah.
So I did an episode on the Nile River. I was like, well, I can do this for every great river in the world. I could do one for the Amazon, the Congo.
You unpack one concept and then it yields other things.
A lot of times I'll do an episode. I'm like, well, this is, I did one on fractals today. And then it touched on chaos theory, which will lead into like the butterfly effect. It's like, okay, those are 2 episodes I could do.
Yeah.
And I should say, when I started the podcast back in 2020, the first thing I did, and I advise every podcaster to do this or YouTuber, I created a list of 100 show ideas. And I kept it in a Google Doc, and I have updated and deleted as I do them. Right. There are now 934 ideas on this list, and it's continually evolving, but I will never run out of stuff so long as I keep this list up to date.
Yep.
And I think it's just a really good way to, as you come up with, and I'll be watching TV or something. I'll be watching a movie. I remember watching A Bridge Too Far, 1977 World War II film about Operation Market Garden. And I'm watching, I'm like, I could do an episode on Operation Market Garden because I've been to all these places. I've been to the bridge in Arnhem in the Netherlands. I did a trip where I started in Normandy and went all the way to Berlin following the path of the Allies. So Operation Market Garden. Boom. I did that.
Yeah.
So the ideas can kind of come from anywhere.
Yep.
And yeah, it is a niche. I understand that it's like I can talk about everything, but I don't really talk about everything.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What we are talking about right now will never be the subject of one of my episodes.
Yeah, fair enough. This is making me wonder, I'm sure it's happened in 1,600 episodes, when you've gotten something wrong and someone calls you out on it, how do you respond to that sort of stuff?
I offer a correction.
Yeah.
So there are different types of errors. There are errors of omission, which I just didn't mention something maybe I should have. And that's going to happen all the time because it's a short show, right? Yeah. There's always more that I mean, some of the episodes are issues that people devote their entire careers to.
Right.
Right. They have PhDs on this subject and that's their whole area of expertise. And I'm trying to condense it into 10 minutes. Right. So I'm always going to leave something out. Then there are errors of commission where I literally say something wrong. And I've had a couple, sometimes it's a brain fart where I said, Bill Buckner was playing for the Cubs when he had the ball go through his legs. He was playing for the Red Sox, which everyone pointed out. I was thinking, I used to collect baseball cards, and I when I think of Bill Buckner, I think of the 1979 Topps baseball card where he's with the Cubs, and I put down Cubs, and I said Cubs, and like 1,000 people corrected me. And I was like, you're right. And the other real famous one, and this was just my stupidity. This is just flat out being wrong. I did one on the internal combustion engine, and as God as my witness, I have never come across an internal combustion engine that had an odd number of cylinders. And I mentioned this, and everyone was like, "Oh, well, such and such had a 5-cylinder car," and it's like, I didn't know that. Like, and this was something I learned. I couldn't just take my assumption,
right?
Just because I had never heard of it doesn't mean that it didn't exist.
Yeah, you can't know what you don't know, but it's a good lesson of like making declarative statements of like, there's no way this exists, is usually a bad idea.
I did the same thing about American nuclear submarine disasters, and that a guy, of course, everybody, my audience is big enough where somebody knows more than me about everything.
Which is kind of great. It's a great aspect of the community.
And for the most part, people will say, "Oh, I did an episode on the element thorium, and I got an email from someone that worked at Oak Ridge National Labs, and like, oh, we were so glad you did this. We shared it around." Or I got a math professor out in California. I did an episode on non-Euclidean geometry. And it's like, I assign this my first day of class now because you've summarized this the best I've heard it.
Yeah.
I just did an episode explaining the Canadian Parliament, and someone said, well, it's the coalition government's technically called a minority government, and he provided a little bit more clarity, and I probably should have worded it and explained it a little differently than I did.
Right.
I wouldn't say that I was wrong, but he was correct that I think I probably could have worded it a little bit better. So yeah, these things kind of do happen. And when they happen, you just say it happened.
Yeah, and you can update your podcast. I mean, this is the nice thing about the blog situation.
Yeah, but I
most
don't.
Content. Oh, really? So how do you address?
In a future episode, I just say, "Hey, we have a correction." I accidentally said that Anchorage was the capital of Alaska. I know Anchorage isn't the capital of Alaska because I've been to Juneau and I've stood in front of the Capitol building. But I don't know what I did. There's another brain
It's
fart
more.
type
It's
thing.
like a newspaper retraction, where in a future edition of the paper, you're replying.
And the reason for that is my priority every day is to get out the next show.
Yeah.
Not going back and fixing previous shows.
Right.
Maybe I could and should, but it's like doing a newspaper.
Yeah.
And I hear these podcasters are like, "Oh, don't worry about your schedule. Just worry about putting out quality." I'm like, no. No newspaper has ever said, "Everyone, today's issue just wasn't good enough. It didn't meet our standards. There's just not going to be a newspaper today." People are like, no.
Yeah.
You have advertisers who paid for it. You have people that expect it.
Right.
Any daily news broadcast, there's a wire. You got to get there in a certain time.
And you have patrons who pay for it as well. So that's part of the equation.
So when people give this podcasting advice, I'm like, you're wrong. Having a set schedule is really important if you want to have a dedicated audience. And so I normally go to bed at like 2 to 4 a.m.
Oof, yeah.
Because I got to get it out the door.
Right.
And you're talking about the production of the show. The production is super easy.
Yeah.
A scripted monologue show is the easiest thing in the world to produce.
But it's the writing. The production is easy, but it's the writing and the research is what I mean by that.
That is what takes up all the time, is the 100%. Writing and research.
Yep.
I use GarageBand. That's it. Nothing. People have laughed at me. And I'm like, okay, well, what can I do with this that I can't do?
No.
I record until I flub up, and I do a lot of episodes where I have to pronounce foreign names.
Yes.
And that is the most challenging part that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Sure.
And so I will sometimes have to do that 4 or 5 times before I get it halfway decent. And then just continue. I just move the waveform, and at the end of it, by the time I'm done recording, it's all fully edited.
Absolutely. All right. Well, speaking of keeping on a timetable and Patreon subscribers, we do have to take a break, and we do have to thank the patrons of this show. But first, we must do our court-mandated trivia segment. Listeners always know that I must try to stump the guest. Considering Gary knows everything about everywhere, I don't know how this is going to go. Are you prepared for a multiple choice trivia question?
If you want to stump me, do something with pop culture.
Oh, all right.
I don't even know who most of these celebrities are nowadays, so you can get me.
It's not quite that. This is in your wheelhouse, so we'll see how this goes. We're talking about traveling and making stuff, and in 2015, another guy from Minneapolis. Are you from the Twin Cities originally? Where are you from originally?
Wisconsin.
Okay.
I went to school there and lived there for a long time.
Yes. Okay. A gentleman from Minneapolis named Andy George did a lot of traveling around Minnesota and even across the country in order to make one thing totally from scratch. His goal was to never use a store-bought item to make this one thing, and he created every component from its natural basic.
Is this the guy that made
component.
the toaster?
Well, I don't know. Here it comes. It took him 6 months and $1,500 to make one of these extremely common items that we take for granted. His video documenting the process went viral in 2015. What single item took Andy 6 months, lots of travel, lots of hard work, and $1,500 to create? I have 3 choices for you. But does this sound familiar to you?
I think.
Okay. Is it A, Andy made a chicken sandwich where he grew the wheat, lettuce, and tomato from seeds, built his own oil press to make mayonnaise, milked a cow for cheese, slaughtered a chicken, and traveled to Los Angeles to harvest salt from the ocean? That is choice A, a chicken sandwich. Or is it B, a single U.S. penny where Andy traveled to an Arizona mine to extract copper ore, sculpted his own furnace out of limestone to smelt the copper, chopped his own firewood for fuel, cast his own die, and imprinted one coin on both sides? That's a U.S. penny, took him 6 months. Or is it C, a pair of shoes where Andy traveled to a local dairy farm to slaughter a cow, purchase a piece of hide, flew to Milwaukee to catch a fish to make fish oil for tanning, grew his own hemp fibers for the laces, and fashioned the shoe mold from local cedar trees? Which item took Andy 6 months and $1,500 to create?
There was a previous example where a guy tried to make a toaster from scratch, and the final product just looked like ass. It was just horrible. But he had to make the wires and everything else.
But did it toast?
So it wouldn't be the penny, because that would be rather trivial.
Okay.
Once you get the copper, the actual act of smelting is not that hard.
Okay, interesting.
You can make a die, and it's illegal. So,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it can't be the penny. And I'm going to say it's the sandwich.
Okay. Gary goes with the chicken sandwich. We will find out the correct
But
answer.
I don't think you also need to go to the ocean to get salt.
Okay.
You could find natural salt in a lot of different places. He could have driven to any place with a salt mine. Maybe he chose to get salt that way. But the wheat, the chicken, that's something you could do within 6 months. Shoes, I think, would probably take a little longer. So I vaguely recall something maybe about a sandwich. So I'm going to go with the sandwich.
All right, he's sticking with sandwich. We'll find out if Gary is correct after this break. It's time to thank the people who make this show possible over at patreon.com/influencepod. Everyone who contributes at any level, and especially those executive producers at the $10 a month level. They are the illustrious Bowie Barks, the incomparable William, the spectacular Duran, and the legendary Dominic Kerr. I just made those titles up just right off the old dome. All right? That's what we do here. It's professional. And if you'd like to support the show at any tier, get some perks, get ad-free episodes, and maybe thinking about shifting some stuff around over there. Been thinking about it. Head on over to patreon.com/influencepod to see what is available and how you can keep the show going. And now it's time to see if Gary has gotten the trivia answer correct. We are back with Gary Arndt, the sole writer, producer, researcher, host, and voice, of course, of the Everything Everywhere podcast, the namesake of his very popular travel blog as well. And before we went to break, we asked the question, a gentleman named Andy from Minneapolis has a YouTube channel where he makes things from total scratch. Nothing purchased from a store, nothing made by any other person. And it took him 6 months and $1,500 to make what? Was it A, a chicken sandwich? Gary chose A. B, a single U.S. penny, or C, a pair of shoes? I always
Actually,
give
in
guests...
hindsight, I almost want to change my answer now.
So you are allowed to change your answer because I always give guests an opportunity to change. What are you thinking? Gary's pondering.
So the thing is, you don't need seed oil for mayonnaise. You can actually do it with, like, animal fat.
Okay.
The wheat is not hard. Killing chicken's not hard. And if he has a channel where he makes things, then it would probably be shoes.
Okay.
I'm going to change my answer to shoes.
Gary is officially changing his answer to C, shoes. I regret to inform him that his first answer was correct. It was a chicken sandwich. Andy George's YouTube channel, which you would love, is called How to Make Everything. And is all about how he tries to make everything without the use of modern technology or materials or commercially available products. So he makes glass.
You should have consulted me, because he overthought you can get the salt without having to go to the ocean.
In the video, he says, look, here's where salt naturally occurs. It's these 4 mines in the U.S. or the ocean. And then he's like, well, I have a trip. I could visit my sister-in-law or someone in Los Angeles. So he just kind of hopped on a plane and went there for other reasons, and then pulled salt out of the ocean. And then whatever he did to not refine, but in terms of salt mines, he's correct. I want to say there's one in North Texas. There's one in Detroit. There's one in Arkansas, which I think is part of the same salt dome. But anyways, there are salt springs you can find. Okay.
Where he doesn't need a lot of salt. And is the $1,500 his plane ticket to go get the salt?
Otherwise, plane ticket and traveling around and I think acquiring.
Because otherwise it's not that hard.
I think you need to team up with this guy.
I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm just saying in terms of the wheat making bread, these are things that humans have done.
Yes. But it is, his channel is all about like, I could get this from Wendy's or Amazon in 10 seconds, but holy shit, it's so much labor to actually make it from nothing, which is, it's great. It's a great channel. So as we're coming to a conclusion here, like I see a lot of parallels, and I'm sure you do too, of like the RSS loyalty based readership and community that was happening in the early internet, compared with, we've traveled through the lens of social media and algorithms, and now we're not on the other side of it, of course, but we're here making a podcast where, audio doesn't really go viral. It's about word of mouth. It's about human connection. It's about education, as you said. So I'm sure the similarities and the comparisons are not lost on you. The beginning of your career and where you are now, right?
Have audio podcasting. And I make the distinction. So not YouTube.
Yeah.
Has a lot of great advantages. You cannot be hurt by the algorithm because there is no algorithm.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of people that ask, well, you must go through your episodes to find which are the most popular and then do more of those. The answer is 1, no. Mm-hmm. And second, there isn't. Mm-hmm. Because it's not an algorithm. Yeah. And what happens on YouTube is that people find, well, I got this one video that got 1 million views, and then one that got 5,000. So I got to do more of the 1 million. And what ends up happening is it's kind of the opposite, or at least part of this idea of a bubble, right? Yeah. You're only getting what the algorithm shows you. For content creators, it's audience capture. Mm-hmm. You find that there's an interest in this, and audience capture almost always is a lowest common denominator thing. Right? That's why you end up talking about the Kardashians or some other stuff. And it's always this, doing elevated or interesting or enlightening content is difficult when you're trying to appease an algorithm.
Right.
There's no algorithm with podcasting. And the flip there's a good and a bad. Yeah. One, it's hard to grow an audience.
It's hard to start. There's no discovery at the beginning. And
it takes time. So I've always likened it to like rolling a large boulder. At first, you can barely budget. You got to rock it back and forth. But once it starts moving and it builds that momentum, then, things really can start happening. So you can't it's harder to lose an audience with a podcast, right?
That's
So
good.
no matter what you publish, people are likened to listen to it.
Yeah.
Whereas on YouTube, they may never even see it, something you create, if YouTube doesn't show it to you.
Right.
And the other thing is that everyone is YouTube, pivot to video. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong for that. I may actually launch a YouTube channel associated with the podcast.
Yeah.
But if you look at the CPM rates, the market has spoken. Audio podcasts get way higher CPMs than YouTube.
Yeah.
Like the biggest niche on YouTube, I think, for CPMs is finance, which gets maybe like a $15 CPM.
Now, are you talking about direct brand deals or like the
like what YouTube
pre-roll ads?
Yeah, you can get direct. I still think it probably has something that still is into play, but I'm talking about YouTube CPMs in terms of what they sell and what they give the content creators, because that's something that can be measured easily across niches.
Yes, indeed.
So in a lot of YouTube channels, maybe might be getting a $2 to $3 CPM.
Yeah.
A bad CPM in audio podcasting is the equivalent of the best CPM on YouTube.
Yeah.
$15 is bad and 20, 25 is average. And I know podcasts, if you have a very targeted niche, that get a lot more.
Right.
And the reason is because, one, people are subscribing through RSS, which means you have a dedicated following. Yeah. And two, you are filling a niche in terms of attention that cannot really be filled by anything else.
Correct.
If you're going for a walk, if you're in your car, someplace where you could only listen to audio content, you're getting people's attention. And they tend to pay more attention than if they're watching a YouTube video or swiping on Instagram.
Right.
So even if someone is thinking of like, well, I want to start a YouTube video, maybe do an audio. I did the audio podcast first. Now, if I launch a YouTube video with the success I've had and all the content I have, I think it would be trivial. I would need help with the actual video production, because if I'm still doing a daily show, but it would be easier to do than the other way around.
But to what end? Meaning, would the goal there be to grow or make new content? And I ask that because, and it's related to everything you just said, despite what we just talked about, YouTube has become the number one platform for podcast discovery and viewership, listenership. It depends
on what you call podcasts.
Correct.
Most people think of a podcast today as guys in headphones talking into a microphone.
Right.
And they're doing some sort of interview or conversation. My show would probably not be considered a podcast on YouTube. There are a lot of shows like mine that are short educational things that consist of nothing but a voiceover and B-roll footage. And they have millions of subscribers. So I think I could take my podcast content, the voiceover part, simply add some B-roll footage and other stuff, and turn that into a video. Maybe I re-record it.
But what you need to do, and again, sorry, listeners, shop talk here, the key to YouTube is the presentation of that content, meaning the title of that video can't just be Tokyo. It has to be what I learned from your show. Tokyo is the most populous city in the world. I had no freaking clue. 37 million people. I'm like, that blew my mind. And so it has to be something that grabs attention, because you are playing to algorithms, which sucks.
And I would for that, I would hire someone. I would hire someone who's a YouTube expert who knows the thumbnail game and the title game. But that's just it. It's all about appeasing the algorithm, right? And that is why it would be a secondary thing and not the primary thing.
Yes.
My title for my podcast episode on Tokyo was Tokyo.
Yes.
And that was
that will die on the vine on YouTube, even if it's the best YouTube video ever made.
I've done some kind of clickbaity titles in the past, not very many. They tend to be very straightforward. But no, that's why it takes. But the content of what I'm doing, the actual episode, that I think would transfer to YouTube.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, totally agree.
And there's a whole bunch of things that, as far as a newsletter, tours, I don't sell merchandise. other than sell ads at this point, I'm not really doing anything in terms of monetization, even though there's a bunch of things I could do. And it's mainly just due to time.
Yeah. Yeah. The other factor here is, YouTube has made this really big play for podcasts. They have cohorted podcasters. They have helped big podcasters optimize for the platform, as we discussed. And then on the other side of the coin, Spotify has been trying so desperately to become the YouTube of audio, which I am not a fan of either of these things necessarily, because it's antithetical to the openness of RSS. Meaning, as shows become exclusive to, I got to subscribe to Wondery to get this show, and I got to subscribe to Spotify to get this show, that is damaging to the podcast ecosystem. And so I'm curious if I guess maybe to close it out, the lessons from the .com boom and bust as they apply to the consolidation of media, tech companies,
RSS
AI.
is great for content creators. It's great for content consumers. It's great for everybody except big media companies.
Yes.
Because they want to have a closed wall garden where they control everything. And the reason why they're trying to push people over there is because they get a higher cut.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yep.
The YouTube podcast strategy is this. We will call YouTube videos podcasts. Mm-hmm. That is their entire strategy. They have done, and I'm not even joking, that they've done nothing. They're just calling YouTube videos podcasts.
Right.
The end.
Yep.
They created a podcast landing page, and I looked at it and was like, "This is the same shit."
I've never even seen that. Yeah, yeah.
It's just my YouTube videos that I watch.
Yes.
What is different here?
Their pitch is that if you position the audio as video, it can be discovered by exponentially more people, which is true because I literally do that for a living. But it's a different. To your point, it's a very different animal.
Yeah, and like I said, I probably will go down that path at some point.
Yeah,
but it will never be the focus.
I think that's
because I also believe that being in someone's head when you listen to it with audio is more powerful than. And I also know from Spotify and Apple data that my completion rate, because my episodes are so short, is very high.
Yes,
it's like 90%.
Yeah.
And if you look at completion rates on YouTube, it is abysmal. Like no one's actually consuming a lot of this stuff. They will abandon after like 30 seconds.
Yep.
So the problem is, I've always called this the gaudy number thing. People got fixated on Instagram. Oh, you have this many followers. Oh, I got this many likes. And that's because they make the number public. For a website, an email, you'll see tons of content creators that talk about the power of an email newsletter.
Yeah.
I worked with so many travel brands, so many tourism boards. Every content creator will tell you this. No one has ever asked about my email newsletter or the number of subscribers I have because they can't see a number. It's a private number, not a public number. Same with podcasts, same with downloads, same with your website. And so if someone he has 1 million YouTube subscribers, I'm sure you've seen channels like this where they have a very high number of subscribers and very low number of views.
Yeah.
But they got a 1 million subscribers.
Or like you said, high numbers of views on 2 to 3 videos, and then the rest is not really reaching.
Most podcasters hide their numbers.
Yeah.
I use a thing called OP3, which is an open source stats. So you can go, and I think I'm the biggest podcast in the world that does this. All of my stats are publicly available. Every day you can see what's happening, where people are coming from, what browser, everything else. And I think more people should do it. But that the lack of the big gaudy number is why it doesn't get as much attention, because people like to say, oh, they got this,
And you're saying by being public, which is easier for you to do because you have a lot of listeners, but by being public, it draws attention from advertisers or the media.
No, not for me. It really does nothing because most people don't know that OP3 exists.
Right. Okay.
But I think in terms of capturing people's attention or developing buzz, if you wanted to look at a public number for someone, you look at the number of reviews they got, like on Spotify or Apple, and that's about it. You can't really do much else.
Yes.
And that's not quite the same gaudy number that you have for social media or YouTube.
Yeah. To wrap up, anything new in the works? Obviously, you're going to keep on trucking with the show. Any upcoming episodes you're excited about, or any new projects that you are thinking about that you'd care to share?
I have no idea what tomorrow's show is going to be, so
Great.
I can't. I literally cannot tell you that. I have a list of things that I need to do, but it's all a matter of I need to start hiring people.
Okay.
That's the thing. I need to. And when people in the podcasting space, they always want to help me with my production and editing. It's like, that's the one thing
That's
I do not need.
No.
That's the easiest part of what I do.
Yeah.
What I need is help writing, and what I need is help on working on several business projects, launching new things, stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's been challenging to find people.
Yeah, I get that. And if people want to subscribe, obviously you can just search for Everything Everywhere in your favorite podcast app. But where else would you direct them? Any social media or websites?
I would not direct them anywhere.
Just right there?
I do not want you to go to social. The more options you give, no, I'm not. This is not a joke. The more options you give people, the more odds are they do nothing.
Yeah.
So my only call to action is find my podcast. Because I don't care about anything else. I can give a crap if you follow me on Instagram because I don't post anything there. If you want to, fine, knock yourself out. But the podcast is where I put in all my time and effort. So that's where the only place you're ever going to see anything.
Beautiful. Well, you've heard it here. Do not follow Gary. He does not care. But do listen to his show because it's great. And it is my pleasure to have him as a guest today. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you again to Gary Arndt for being my guest. He is just truly uniquely qualified to do this very specific and simultaneously very broad thing that he does. His story and how it transcends a variety of chapters in internet history, and how he's been there making internet stuff through all of it. I just, I found I took away a lot of lessons for the 2025s and beyond. So thank you again to Gary for being my guest. Do subscribe. It reminds me that his show would be fantastic to listen to with kids, actually. Listen to in the car. My kids do listen to a lot of audio content in their rooms during the day and before bed. So, maybe a little history of everything everywhere would be useful to them. Maybe we drop out of this school business and just listen to podcasts all day. No, stay in school, kids. Stay in school until college, and then skip that part. For now, my name is Matt Silverman, reminding you to please rewind your podcast after listening, and I will talk at you in 1 week's time.